I've always liked Al Gore for being ahead of his time. You can dislike him for his various policies, and I'm fine with that. But on two situations, he's a time traveler. I mean, he got the internet before anybody knew it, and he was on this CO2 warming thing before any real politicians of that stature were on it and dedicated his life to it. So I'm a big fan of it. Looks like Al Gore's prediction from however long ago was directionally correct, but full of hyperbole, meaning that his predictions were way off, that we would already be underwater, way off. So prediction-wise, I don't think Al Gore has any credibility. But directionally, both sides are on board now. He actually got there first. Now, it took me a long time to get to the point where I could say, yeah, probably at least the science part is right. I still think the prediction part is crazy. But the science part, looks like both Republicans and Democrats are starting to get on board on that. Here's a big mistake that Al Gore made. When people mocked him for claiming he invented the internet, he said, yeah, you're right, and he backed down from that. He should not have backed down from that. The reason he should not have backed down from that is that he invented the internet. Now, he didn't invent it technically, of course. He was not the technologist. He wasn't programming anything. He didn't come up with the idea. But he was the person who got it funded before anybody knew what the hell it was. Al Gore made the internet by getting it funded. Because having a good idea doesn't get you there. You got to have that good idea and get it funded. He saw it early. He saw it decades before other people saw it. He funded it. All right, he made that happen. So when he backed down from that, I thought it was the biggest mistake anybody's ever made in politics, because he should have just owned it and said, I didn't mean that technically, but I did get the funding, and look what's happened. I saw it early. Now, climate change. Climate change is kind of interesting, because as we talked about, even the Trump administration has now, maybe grudgingly, but it seems that they've accepted the connection between CO2 and warming. It seems that smart people all over the administration are now on that side. Now, whether that's the end of the world, I agree with President Trump that we're really good at solving this kind of thing. We'll be fine. I'm glad that other people are panicking, because that's why things get solved. But I'm personally not going to panic, because I know we got this, right? But it looks like Al Gore's prediction from however long ago was directionally correct, but full of hyperbole, meaning that his predictions were way off, that we would already be underwater, way off. So prediction-wise, I don't think Al Gore has any credibility. But directionally, both sides are on board now. He actually got there first. Now, it took me a long time to get to the point where I could say, yeah, probably at least the science part is right. I still think the prediction part is crazy. But the science part, looks like both Republicans and Democrats are starting to get on board on that. So I've always liked Al Gore for being ahead of his time. You can dislike him for his various policies, and I'm fine with that. But on two situations, he's a time traveler. I mean, he got the internet before anybody knew it, and he was on this CO2 warming thing before any real politicians of that stature were on it and dedicated his life to it. So I'm a big fan of Al Gore, and I think the complaints about him, he has a big house and he flies on a jet, those are dumb complaints. I think Greta should just fly in a jet if she wants to. I don't think it has anything to do with her message. We do live in a world where we have dirty tools and clean tools, and maybe sometimes you have to use them both. So I don't think that's a legitimate argument. Anyway, let's talk about Joe Rogan. As you know, he did sort of a quasi-endorsement for Bernie Sanders. And, of course, he got a lot of heat for that, because He was accused of being a bad person because his guests have said bad things. Let me stop you here, because I'm seeing all the nut jobs in the comments, and I just have to say this. If you're still saying that CO2 doesn't contribute to warming of the planet, your group of people who are saying that is just shrinking to nothing. We're kind of past that. Completely fair to say that predictions aren't what they say they were. We're not going to be necessarily underwater in 10 years. Completely fair. But that one fact, that CO2 causes warming, that one's, you could be right, but it would be like you could be right that ghosts are real. I mean, it's sort of in that category. You could be right that the moon is made of cheese. I haven't been there. I haven't taken a chunk. Maybe the moon is made of cheese. I'm not saying you're 100% wrong, but you should be embarrassed by that argument at this point. All right, the predictions you can still be uncertain about. All right, so Joe Rogan got a lot of heat because he has guests that say controversial things, so he's being painted with his guests. So Slate did this story in which they were basically trying to trash Joe Rogan. And they have this theory that Joe Rogan is responsible for what his guests say, and that Bernie Sanders is responsible for what Joe Rogan does. So Bernie Sanders is responsible for Rogan's opinions, which are somehow transferred from his guests into Rogan and then transferred again into Bernie. So somehow Democrats have this weird idea of guilt transference, that if you associate with people in any professional way or even personal, that their bad thoughts and ideas transfer to you because you've promoted them somehow, and then they transfer again, presumably, to Bernie. But it wouldn't end there, because if Bernie's got this badness, all of his supporters have it too. We've learned that, right? So apparently, if you're a guest on Joe Rogan and you say bad things, those bad things transfer into Joe Rogan, and then because he endorsed Bernie and Bernie accepted it, those bad things transfer into Sanders, and then, of course, the voters are really to blame. So Bernie's voters are a bunch of racists and transphobes, according to Slate. Now, watching Slate cancel its own people is very fun. So that's a good time. All right. So, Scott needs to understand the number of hoaxers. Don't know what that means. The science of CO2 causing warming is not there. I think at this point you'd have to be an idiot to think that. I'm going to be, there's just no way around it anymore. I'm pro-skepticism, and there's a whole lot about climate science and funding and what they really want and the projections and the economic stuff. There's plenty of stuff to be skeptical about, and I'm skeptical about a lot of it. But that one question, does CO2, all else being equal, adding CO2 to the atmosphere, I think you have to trust that the scientists got that one right. I mean, that's sort of like knowing that gravity works all over the earth. It's sort of like that. But the sun. All right, I'm just going to look at your comments for a little bit because I was talking and not looking at them so much. Invite Tony Heller on. So Tony, I was going to have him on some time ago. We talked about it. Tony Heller is, I think, the most effective persuader on the CO2 is all a big hoax. And I've looked at a lot of his material, and I would say that he raises lots of questions that are worth answering about the accuracy of terrestrial thermometers and such, and I think all that's worth looking at. But on the basic question of whether CO2 causes warming, you just have to release on that one. All right. it was fine to be skeptical in the beginning, but we're way past that. So there's some evidence that Elizabeth Warren's campaign is crashing. And I'm still surprised at Biden's popularity, because I still have never met a Biden supporter. Have you? Now, I realize I'm in California, and I spend time in my little corner of the internet, so maybe it's just I'm walled off in my own little bubble, and there's tons and tons of Biden supporters everywhere. But why don't I ever meet one? I've met lots of Bernie supporters. If you looked at the Bernie support and the Biden support, they're about the same, right? In that, relatively in that same range. Why is it that I've met lots of Bernie supporters, but I've never met a Biden supporter? Not once. So I have to ask myself whether those poll numbers are even real at this point. But they're different polling organizations, so it seems unlikely they would all be bought off. But it's one of those questions why I don't ever meet one. Scientists and act like that the scientists got the CO2 wrong, and it's all water vapor, and it's not that big of an effect, and all that. I know you want to do that. All of you arguing this stuff, CO2 went from 0.03 to 0.04, it just makes my head hurt because the arguments are so bad. If your argument is that CO2 only went up a little bit, therefore can't be to blame, a little bit of poison will kill you. All right? The scientists understand that it only went up, by whatever fraction compared to what it used to be. They've looked at that. All right? You're not the one who discovered that. They've looked at that. So a little bit of poison can kill you. All right. And here's the other worst comment. I was waiting for this. The planet thrived when CO2 was way higher. All right. If you are of the opinion that CO2 can't be the problem because in our past we know that CO2 was much higher and it wasn't warmer, you have been bamboozled, my friend. You have been really bamboozled. Do you know what's wrong with that? What you don't know, so if you look at the skeptical stuff, the skeptics will say CO2 used to be way higher and yet the earth wasn't warmer, therefore CO2 is not a problem. Do any of you know what's wrong with that? Will you be hearing it for the first time from me? Because it means you haven't really looked into it. If this is the first time you hear what I'm going to say now, you should abandon everything you thought about CO2 and warming, because you don't know a frickin' thing. Here it is. CO2 used to be a lot higher, even though the earth was cooler, because other things were very different then. I'm not sure if it was the sun or the atmosphere or whatever it is. But you don't have to go very far to find out that the scientists' response to that is yes, CO2 didn't make as much a difference because all of the other variables, or some of the other important variables, were different. So if you thought that was the kill shot to CO2, well, it used to be higher, you just are so uninformed, it's painful. Because it doesn't take long to Google that and find out, yeah, it was much higher, all the scientists know that, they all acknowledge it, and they know why the CO2 did not cause warming then. It's very easy to understand. I think it was the sun cycles or something was different. There was something different then, whatever it was. But you really, if you want to sound smart talking about CO2, never say these things. The scientists forgot to study the sun. That just marks you as terribly uninformed. Because yes, they did. They studied the sun. 2, there used to be more CO2 in the past. That just marks you as uninformed. Because there were other variables that are different. We understand that. And then there are other complaints like, well, there was this period where the CO2 was rising in the early industrial part, and for 17 years or something, the temperature didn't go up. So you're like, oh, there was this period where CO2 went up in our modern times and the temperature didn't go up with it. I know it's because, the answer, of course, is that it's not lockstep. Sometimes there can be a lag of 17 years. The scientists say that. That's what happens. None of these are criticisms against the actual science. If you're reading the skeptical science, and then you don't immediately Google what the scientists say as a response to the skepticism, you haven't done anything. If all you're doing is reading what Tony Heller said and said, well, that looks pretty convincing, then you're gullible. You should not be in the argument at all. You should recuse yourself. If you read what Tony Heller says, and then you take any one of his arguments and Google it, and then see what the official response is, well, at least then you've seen both sides. Somebody says, your BS makes me sick. Well, I will heal you by blocking you. Somebody says, incorrect. Incorrect gets blocked. Those are the rules, people. You can give me reasons, but you can't just say incorrect. We'll see if anybody else needs to get blocked. I can't watch this alarmism. Mine is the opposite of alarmism, people. I just told you we're going to be fine even if the CO2 is the problem. So that's the opposite of alarmism. Let's see who else needs to be blocked. 10 years from now, you will regret these statements. Block. Telling people to believe it because we said so is not science. No, that's not what I'm saying. IPCC excluded the sun and only choose to find human change. They excluded the sun. Do you know why they exclude the sun? Because scientists have, you're blocked. I'm going to block people who say it's the sun from now on. You can say the sun to other people, but I don't want to see it anymore because it's just too annoying that you're not even trying. You should at least try. It's okay to be wrong, but at least try. I'm just seeing some more comments. Can the theory be tested? Here is somebody saying CO2 is twice what it's ever been in 40,000 years. Yeah, don't know what that means. They won't debate him. No, there's a reason that they don't debate some of the skeptics. Why are they using it as a power grab? That's a different question. You can call people gullible, but if they call you that, you block them. That is correct, because when I call them gullible, then I give my reason. If they were to give me a reason and then call me gullible, I would not block them. If they said, here's what you're missing, and I call you gullible, that's okay. That would follow from the reasons. Reasons are okay. Hasn't the world been warming since the Ice Age ended? Look it up. Just looking at some more of your comments. CO2 is not a good greenhouse gas. That's a gullible skeptic point. CO2 is not a good greenhouse gas, and water vapor, blah blah blah. Do you think that the scientists are not aware of how the various gases in the atmosphere, like which ones are big ones and which ones are small ones? Okay, that's not a good criticism. Climate scientists, they can rank which ones have the most effect. So I'm not going to block you. You just need to look into that a little bit more. Now, I'm not going to invite Tony Heller because he is not credible. And so, unfortunately, he's not credible. I do like some of his criticisms about the measuring the temperature. But at this point, the temperature is measured in many ways, and it's obvious that the planet is getting warmer in the last decade or so. So I don't think I want to muddy the waters with that. Boom, boom, boom. All right, just looking at some of the comments. Wow, boy, as soon as I bring up that comment, I've never seen any topic in which people know less but are more confident than climate science. In both sides, by the way, this is not... Both sides are so unreasonably confident about that it is a problem or isn't, that I'd say they're both equally irrational. All right, let's just see if there's anybody else who needs to get blocked. We don't have enough characters to give you a well-explained reason. Actually, that's a good point. I'm not expecting you to give an entire argument. Just give me the basis. So if, for example, you said, I don't believe you because I read this article in Wired or whatever. I don't need to see the whole thing. I just need to know there's something there. Why don't they debate the credible skeptics? I used to ask that question too. So that's a reasonable question. Why don't the scientists debate the credible skeptics? And I can tell you there's actually a good reason for that. It's not obvious until you start digging into it yourself. And here's the reason. The reason is that if you debate them, it elevates the skeptic's opinion. Because then you're saying, oh, this is a worthy opinion, worthy of being debated on the public stage. That's just not the case. The skeptics who are going to debate the scientists on scientific levels have not risen to the level of being credible enough that they should be on the same stage. Now, and I'll say this a million times, if the debate were only about the accuracy of the models, the predictions, then I would say that would be a fair debate, because nobody's really great at predicting the future in 80 years, and even scientists should say, yeah, we're not the best at that. So that would be a fair debate. I think the skeptics would have the advantage in that, actually. But the basic science, the scientists, I have grudgingly come to accept that they would be worse off for even imagining that the counter-argument was worthy of public exposure. And what happens is we, the public, can't judge who's right. So the skeptics would say, you forgot the sun. And then the scientists would say, no, we didn't. And then half the people would say, you forgot the sun.